You know my sister, the fetus?
Hey, Nancy, you sure that you want to go through with this? She's brave.
The sperm that got away. Oh yeah,
Vadia. Because you were always out.
Oh, yeah, I was
Street running down the street.
I was
I didn't even do anything.
I was always called Vadia. Yeah, wait a minute. What about all the black and blue marks I got in my arms from Nobby? I should tell him I was going to get cancer. He used to punch me in the arms all the time. He did. My arm. I said, I'm going to get cancer when I get older. I'm going to have cancer.
She's not sitting there for
Come
now.
on, cancer, I want some. I remember telling him that.
You didn't have anything. Might as well have cancer.
Telling me about things that you remember from your childhood. You can start with the little goose and duck incident and move on to Robinson Street. Those were both good things.
Well, the Robinson Street thing would have to be first.
All right, well, tell me in sequence, okay? Tell me things you remember from your childhood in sequence from the way they began, okay?
That's usually the way
You
it is.
were born. What came next?
The duck, no. We moved to Robinson Street, which was a big adventure in Pa's life. Because the house, I think, cost him $1,100 or $1,200.
Okay, hold up 1 second. Do we need to mic him? Okay. All right, do you have a portable mic or do you want to just use...
Full.
No, that was a good idea.
Okay, you know what? You want to sit up as much as you can in that cavernous
Couch is...
Sorry, you
Couch
you
is
can
very...
sit back. Yeah, just
It's almost impossible to sit back.
When you cut the large fridge out, there's a glass.
There, that's better.
Yeah, you don't have to, just be natural.
I know, I'm only kidding. Just be natural. I like that. Not that natural.
What else?
Okay, all right, why don't we get back to Robinson Street before you get too comfortable.
Okay. Are we ready now?
Yeah. Let me know when you're ready to roll tape. Speed, okay.
Okay. I think the thing that I remember the most about Robinson Street was the day we moved. The house, I believe it was $1,200 he paid for it. And like Ethel said, Pa had never seen the inside of the house at all. Of course, we hadn't. And I don't think Ma had even. Ma didn't even know Pa bought it. He had $200 he had managed to save. And I think he had borrowed the rest from someone and a small amount from the bank. And we were living on Floyd Street at the time. And the day we moved, I believe the whole family was there. Dolly probably wasn't there. Yes, she didn't remember it, but we all had cardboard boxes and paper bags, and we walked up Central Street, down Gorham Street, and across this little bridge that was near a waterfalls. And of course, we were kids. I was like 6 years old at the time, I think, and we were petrified crossing this little bridge because there were spaces of about maybe 5 to 6 inches where the water was rushing underneath. And there we were like little ducks or pheasants following Pa up the street and across the bridge, carrying all the boxes, all our clothes. We spent, I think it was at least 2 days that I remember doing that, right into the night, back and forth to the house, and that's how we moved. I know we carried some of the chairs and things like that. Some of the bigger items, I guess they might have moved some other way, I don't recall, but I would say 90% of the house was moved by hand in cardboard boxes and in bags and any way we could get it there. It was a big thing for us to even go into the house. The house was kind of a mess, but it was one thing Pa always wanted was his own house. I remember that. He was always talking about that. That was a big day in his life. I think that's why he never left that house. It was the first thing he ever bought, I think, and it was the most important thing to him.
Now, what was it like once you moved in there? What was he like once you moved in there?
Well, Pa was a workaholic. Did everything. Painted, never stopped working, never stopped moving, never went anywhere outside of working and working around the house. Yeah, he's gardens. We always had gardens and animals. One story that I told a little while ago was about these ducks. Pa was always fond of animals. No matter where we went, we had pigeons, ducks, everything, goats. We were at one of these Portuguese, I don't know what you call it. It's a raffle, I think they call them, raffle. And they were raffling off these 3 ducks. Well, 2 people won the 2 ducks and we won the other one. Of course, the other people didn't want anything to do with these. These were live ducks. They probably weighed about 5 or 6 pounds apiece. They were huge. Of course, these people handed them to the Ferreras. They'd take anything. So we walked home from that. It was on back Central Street someplace where it was. We walked home with these live ducks quacking away all the way up the street again. If you saw people doing that today, it would be a spectacle. And yet, we thought it was fun. We got those ducks home and kept them for quite a while. And it was, nothing was unusual. It was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. It was a little different, but it was us.
Now, how about the goat? Who did that goat follow? What was that?
Well, that goat was, actually was my goat the year when it was, Pa had bought it. And it was a female. It was the friendliest thing. It got to be all out, it was a pet, really. Pa used to milk it, and she became part of the family. The day when Julie and I were going to the Butler School, the goat followed Julie to school. She couldn't chase it back. It wouldn't listen to her anyway. She was kind of timid, so she just proceeded on to school. The goat's outside in the playground, barring away out there, making a spectacle of himself. And the principal was Chuck DeLorme at the time, took me out of my class and asked me if that was my goat out there. Someone told him it was my goat. I went outside. Of course, there she was. So I had to take her by the collar and drag her all the way home. It's unusual. We lived in the city, which is strange that we had all those animals, but everyone knew we had the animals. It was our form of entertainment, really. That's what we did on our, in our spare time. We fed the animals, played with them, and ate them.
Multi-purpose
Yes, they served many purposes, a multitude of purposes.
We also
We-
had our rabbits.
We had rabbits, chickens.
The chickens.
We had everything in that. We had everything in that yard. And most of it was given to us, if I remember correctly. Pa used to, we had these little chickens that were like birds. They were a very unusual chicken. They were white, and they used to fly. They were like a big pigeon, but they were actually chickens. I don't know where Pa got them, but I know someone gave them to him. And they multiplied. We ended up having quite a few, and I remember Pa used to have to clip their feathers so they wouldn't fly over the fence. He eventually had to put a screening over the top of their pen when they used to walk out in the yard. So because they used to grow them feathers back, and they'd fly, and of course they'd hit that screen. But we ate them too. Nothing lasted too long in the Ferrara household. If it walked around for any length of time, we ate it.
Not when you had 9 mouths to feed, right?
Yeah, it was fun. We had our own Alexanders, I guess, or Demoulises. Go out in the yard, pick carrots, potatoes,
I remember
eat a rabbit.
me to dig up
We-
potatoes. I enjoyed very much just to see that come out of the earth, It's something.
It's a lot of
else. It
work.
really was.
Pa was demanding when it came to that garden. It was his specialty. And he'd grow the stuff, and Ma would can it. They both worked very hard at that. But it was a form of saving money. We didn't have the money at the time. it served a purpose. It was a lot of work, though. It was a lot of work for him. I remember Pa coming home at night. He'd leave what he'd call his mala, which is it'd be like a lunch bucket. For, what we would have, it was leather. He'd leave it by the rear door. That's how we knew he was home. And then he'd go in the backyard. If we came down the stairs, we knew Pa was home, because he had that mala there, and he always managed to save a little something in there for us. Candy bars. Used to save. Ma used to always give him a sweet. And no matter how hungry he was, or whatever, or even if he wanted it, he always saved that little sweet, whatever he could, for whoever opened the mala, and we'd share. We used to look forward. We wouldn't open it when he wasn't there, of course, but we'd wait for him to open that mala and see if that Hershey bar was there.
Right. That's exactly
And he used to
how
do
it's
it every single day. There wasn't one time that he wouldn't miss. He'd always, it was a little thoughtfulness on his part. I think he really enjoyed that. He'd save, even if it was a little cupcake or something that, or a cookie that Ma would give him, he would save that for us, and we'd share it. This one's turn, it was my turn yesterday. Simple, but it was fun.
Now, can we pull back and get a two-shot of Ethel?
He always managed to save a little something in there for us. Candy bars. Used to save. Ma used to always give him a sweet. And no matter how hungry he was, or whatever, or even if he wanted it, he always saved that little sweet, whatever he could, for whoever opened the mala, and we'd share. We used to look forward. We wouldn't open it when he wasn't there, of course, but we'd wait for him to open that mala and see if that Hershey bar was
That's
there.
right. That's exactly
And he used
how
to
it's
do it
supposed to
every single day. There wasn't one time that he wouldn't miss. He'd always, it was a little thoughtfulness on his part. I think he really enjoyed that. He'd save, even if it was a little cupcake or something that, or a cookie that Ma would give him, he would save that for us, and we'd share it. This one's turn, it was my turn yesterday. Simple, but it was fun.
Now, can we pull back and get a two-shot of Ethel and Nobby, because Ethel, the purple there, and Nobby, because I was going to have you guys talk about your trip to Madeira. Because you went, you will have your trip.
Oh, well, she's waiting.
I think he had intended
Okay.
to go back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They always
No.
do.
Are you
Okay, yeah.
ready to, what have you
We're
gonna
ready
do?
anytime you are. Why don't you start off, and you can, between the two of you, tell us the story of when Pa ended up
Yeah.
coming here, and you can go on to the Madeira.
Well, I think a lot of people don't realize, especially, I think the young people and us, exactly what foreign people went through, especially when I think of Pa, when I heard the story when he was 16 years old, and he had an argument with his father about working and so forth. He had older brothers, and as most siblings would do, they always think one's getting more favoritism than the other. And I have a feeling that Pa might have been a little bit spoiled at the time, but he was very pig-headed, obviously, when you hear the story. 16 years old, after having what he thought was a real bad argument with his father, decides to come to America. 16 years old. If you thought of that today, by today's standards, it wouldn't be that bad. But, I mean, you're talking 70, 80 years ago.
Even by
When
today.
by today's standards, for 16-year-old to go on his own, but coming to America, I mean, there wasn't that much here. They really thought there was, I guess. And he didn't have basically family here. You know, he had a brother. And I remember him saying, when you get on that boat, that you get on the boat, and he just made up his mind to come here, out of anger, I guess. But like Ethel said, he had intended, I think, at one time to go home, to go back, but he never did. And that kind of prompted us to, Ethel and I, we wished everyone could come, but we went to Madeira and to see where Pa's roots were and try to get some idea of what type of life that they led. And when I think both of us, I don't know about Ethel, but I had kind of a different mental picture of actually what type of life they led. I was a little surprised when I got there. It was a lot more primitive than I had even envisioned. The town was called Paul de Mar, and it's very backlandish as far as Madeira is concerned, and Funchal, the town of, or the city of Funchal.
It almost seemed exactly the way as he had left it.
I can't imagine it being any
Anything had
different.
changed.
There was a few
There's nothing to do
a
there.
few newer homes, but people lived in total poverty. But to listen to Pa talk about it during the few times that he did speak about it, it was happy for him. They had a nice life, I guess, but it felt good to. I remember Ethel and I arrived there in Funchal, and then we made our way to Paul de Mar, and Ethel stayed with at that house just for a moment, and I walked off by myself. I didn't know where his house was, but I wanted to somehow see how it would feel to walk on the same area or stand on the same parts of the beach, and which was very rocky, not like the beaches that we're accustomed to. Just how it would feel, and
Actually, his family used to build boats there,
yeah.
and then his mother would bake bread for the village. But I can't see that anything was that
No,
different,
it was
except
very-
they had one restaurant that they had just built.
It was a newer one, but they really didn't
New
have too
church,
much.
but
It's a nice
everything
feeling, though, to.
was the same.
It's a nice feeling to. I sat on the rocks outside, which by luck would have it, I was close to where his house was. I didn't know it, but I was sitting on the rock for a little while. In fact, I don't think you even knew where I went.
No, for about an hour.
I took off, and I was sitting on a rock, just trying to visualize and thinking, and it was a nice. It was a nice feeling. It was a.
And to walk
it
the
felt
roads
nice.
that he had.
It felt nice. It was.
played in.
I think of all the times, that was one of the. It was the nicest time that I had personally to sit quiet and just to think and listen to the water, and just think of. No one was around, and it was different. It was a nice feeling. We had a lot of fun
We
when we
did.
went there.
He had never returned because he met, our mother at age 25, and then he had never returned, so that when his parents died, then he didn't want to. Maybe financially he could have then, but he just didn't feel like he wanted to.
He
go
vowed
back.
he'd never go back
Yeah.
after that. He felt
He'd
very
never
bad.
seen his mother again after age 16, his mother and father.
That was quite
And
a
the
thing.
best.
Quite a shock to him.
He had one sister Rose and Uncle Frank here.
I think it bothered him more than he let on. I think when she passed away, some people were saying that she died of a broken heart because she really pined for him being the baby of the family, and maybe there was some truth to that. And I think he kind of realized that, and he felt real bad about that. That much I know, because I remember one time we had asked him if him and Ma would want to go to Portugal, and he's.
Hold that thought for a second. Till we pick that up. Okay.
Maybe you can his village, and when the boat went by, his mother was waving the sheets.
Oh, yeah, do you know
yeah,
about that one?
I don't remember that part,
Oh,
but
that's all right. You get, well, then,
You can even,
Yeah.
do you know
Yeah.
about that?
I didn't really.
I don't remember. I know he was brokenhearted. Really, I think over the years, and
I remember him
especially
crying at the
especially when she passed away, he had no desire at all to go back there. I think it really It really hurt him more than I think. Pa was a very sensitive individual. He had his faults like every other person, and he was a good father. But he's more sensitive than I think anyone realized. He kept everything to himself. He was used to fending for himself after that time. And I remember he told us at the kitchen table that he would never, ever, ever go back to Portugal, ever. That is, since his mother had passed away. He would never. He says he didn't go back when she was alive, and he'd never go back ever again. And he never did.
I think he was about ready to go back when he met Ma. That was the time. He was 25. You know, he probably had a few dollars then. And then right after that, the babies came, one after another. And then when he was financially able to, his mother and father had passed away, and he didn't want to go back anymore.
But just like Marie was saying, I don't know the story, but as you mentioned it, I recall that somebody talking about that as the ship where they lived, and someday when we all go there, we'll see that there's a port nearby, and that ship had to go by their property on its way out to sea. And I guess she stood outside the back door facing the ocean, waving a white sheet, waving to him, waving it. And I try to think of how a young kid would be, how he'd be thinking, what would be going through his mind. I'd probably jump overboard and come back. That's, I think, what most people would do. I can't imagine. I don't know what would hold someone there. I guess that's the way, the type of people they were.
His brother had told him that he wasn't doing something right.
Yeah.
He wasn't building this boat right, and that was enough to. He got very.
Trigger his little
He
temper.
got very
He cut his hand, and his brother says, "What's the matter? What you watching? What you doing?" And he says, "As if he
Took
would
that
cut
as an
his hand."
insult.
Yeah, he took it as an insult.
Mhm.
But to travel 3,000 miles for 65 years or 70
Respect.
years.
He demanded
Took him a long
respect.
time to get over these things.
Yeah.
I would say he's a little stubborn.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay, now why don't we want to stop tape for a minute?
They had a good
And,
time.
Sure it's settled.
Okay, so you know what, Dave? Why don't you start off and tell me about your sports and that you and Nobby were involved in.
Well, we both liked sports when we were kids. The girls didn't play that much, but we both liked sports. But I remember when we did have a game or something like that, we'd end up staying there doing work instead of getting there and getting out in the field and playing. You know, my father would make us do work. Most of the time, Nobby got stuck with it because he was older. You know, so. He'd end up digging the garden. He'd be late for games all the time. I always remember that.
So he'd end up working in the garden, and Pa would let him go off and go to the games?
Well, he'd let him go after he did his work, you know, but most of the time he'd be late for the games, and, you know, it wasn't so much me, but he was late a lot of times, you know.
So how'd you get out of it?
Well, because I was younger, you know, so he'd make the older one do the work most of the time, you know. So I got out of a lot of it, you know. But I always remember him being late for all his games and rushing, you know, and it was kind of funny in a way. He'd be rushing, you know, he'd never make it in time, and then he'd get chewed out by the coaches and all that stuff. Always racing between that and doing his ball games and stuff like that.
What sports was it? Just baseball?
Baseball, and, you know, we played other sports, but mostly it was baseball, yeah. Yeah, in high school, yeah, he was the captain and stuff like that, but even the church teams and stuff was the same way, you know, all the way through Babe Ruth League, and, you know, always rushing around trying to make it for the games, because in the summertime you always had work to do in the yard and stuff like that, you know.
So now, was there anything else you liked to do when you were a kid? Anything else you remember about Pa or something you liked to do when you were a kid, or that, you know, Pa did?
about all
in
your
the field
pigeons?
chasing butterflies.
What about your
They-
pigeons?
Well, I mean, you know, we did a lot of different things, but you know, around the house it was mostly, you know, just yard work and a couple of the animals, taking care of the animals and stuff. I had pigeons and stuff for years,
That
but
was his hobby.
that was my particular. My father didn't have anything to do with it. No one had anything to do with it except me. So that was just, I had them, you know, for years, but
You know, when Pa was young, he had pigeons.
Yeah.
no, I had all kinds of animals. I always liked animals.
So you raised the pigeons?
Yeah.
Where'd you get them?
Well, I bought them off these old timers that used to raise birds and stuff. I'd go to different places and buy one or two different type of these fancy pigeons and raise them, you know. All different types, 4 or 5 different types. Homing pigeons, fancies, tumblers, different types of pigeons. And I'd raise them and then I'd sell a few to, you know, to someone else that wanted to start or something. There's no money in it or anything. It was just like a hobby, that's all. But it was kind of a fun hobby.
Every now and then we used to steal one and eat one.
No, only the squabs,
Tell him about the time.
the big white ones.
You're talking to the parakeet every day.
Oh, come on, it's ridiculous.
Used to walk around the house with a parakeet on his head.
Oh, yeah, see, he leaves out the good stuff.
All the
Used
good
to like
stuff.
to go
Yeah.
fishing too, Dave.
Oh yeah, well I mean everybody did that. I mean, you know.
Where'd you go fishing?
Well, we fished in the brook right nearby the house. You know, Hales Brook. So I mean, you could catch 100 fish in a day there. So you know, it's a lot different today. You can't catch fish like that today because the water's not as clean and stuff. But you could catch, if you wanted to stay there for 8 or 10 hours, you could catch 100 fish, or 50 or whatever. You know, 50 or 100 fish in a day by yourself, one at a time, and you can't do that today.
Now, after you caught them, did you bring them home to Vovo cook?
No, we just throw them back in the water most of the time. You know.
Same one over again.
No, you just throw them back in the water. In them days, you just fish for fun and stuff, you know, just for fun.
My mother wouldn't dare cook.
Tell him about the fish hook you had in your head from Bobby Tibbet.
Oh, yeah, when the guy hooked me.
Put the daredevil in, stuck in the
Yeah, but the only reason he hooked me, because I hooked him a week before. When you got to get back at the guy, right? I don't blame him, you know. Yeah, one time I went fishing, and the guy, I mean, I had hooked the guy casting one time, and a couple of weeks later he got me back right in the same spot that I got him.
You remember walking by? We were all playing baseball and we were walking
No, I remember it, but I don't like to talk about it.
I started laughing and he turned around and he funny.
I saw him down the street. I was like, big.
Was it shining in the sun? When I was walking, you could see the lure shining? Is that what you're saying?
I could see it swinging on you.
Even a half a mile away, you could still see
Quite.
you could still see it swinging back and forth. I'm through.
You're through? No other stories like that?
Well, I don't know. I can't think of any more. He thought of a few.
We'll see.
He used to walk to Brockleman's and the dog would meet.
I remember when Tivy lost his shoe, his Talbot shoe in the river. I remember that, his brand new $40 shoe. That's all I remember. But that's kind of funny when somebody loses they just go to Talbot's and buy a new pair of shoes and they're fooling around near the water and their shoe falls into the water. They're $40. In them days, that was a lot of money for shoes. Talbots, they were expensive.
Still are expensive.
$25, $30 for a pair of shoes. and we saw it going down the stream. We were trying to follow it, trying to catch up with it. We never did catch up with it.
So
Your
Dolly,
turn.
what was this
well,
about these, were they picnics like? Did
Well,
the
the thing I
B&M
most
did?
remember when we were children, my father, he worked for the Boston, Maine Railroad, and about 2 or 3 times a year, we'd take a trip into Nantasket, go by ferry, or else we probably would take a train to Wayland Park. And that was a big day, and we'd be up part of the night just getting ready, you know, 'cause we'd be up bright and early in the morning to, you know, we had to get there early. It was an outing, it was the whole day, the whole family, it was a family outing. And we really looked forward to that every summer, really did. It was, you
But that's
know,
because he didn't have a car, so he had
that's right, we
to
had
depend
no
on that.
transportation, you know, so that was a way of getting there, and it was very enjoyable, we really had a nice time. Looked forward to it.
So what'd you do when you were there? What did you do when you got to Nantasket Beach?
We went in the water, you know, they had a picnic, we brought all kinds of food and, you know, went swimming, right?
All the free stuff. Anything
And
that
we
was
went on,
free.
we did go on some rides. you know,
Remember the
and
time we all got sunburned?
Oh, yes, we had gone to Olache
Olache
Beach.
Beach, that was
I
terrible.
remember that very clearly, and there's, I think it was the first,
Julie got burned the worst.
and Ethel and Hilda too.
Everybody
they got
was like dying
very
over there.
severely. And also there was Mary Agua, one of my sister's, Hilda's friends, it was quite bad.
We were all like
Yeah, they
dying
were all
over
come
there
back like
that
a
day.
bunch
I
of
remember that.
lobsters.
We had no place to
We
hide.
had stayed there a little bit longer than we should have, you know.
Yeah, everybody
Yeah,
was
that's
sick
right,
and
yeah, we
everything.
had-
Yeah, that was terrible.
Yes, we were all sick, and it was
We just
quite,
jumped
quite
in
the
your car and
day.
go home, we had to wait
Yeah,
for the train.
same, yeah, it was quite the day. you know.
That's when Mom and Pa were doctor
We never
and nurse.
forgot that. What?
That's when Mom and Pa were doctor and nurse. We
Mm.
very rarely saw a doctor.
Right. So,
So now, what else was it you liked to do? My mother was saying about
Well,
the garden.
oh yes, when I used to ask my father if I could dig up the potatoes, because he had this big huge vegetable garden, everything in the kitchen sink was there. And I used to always ask him if I could dig up the potatoes from the ground, because I just enjoyed seeing this, just digging, seeing those potatoes coming from the ground was something real different, you know. Oh, yes, I remember my Aunt Annie, that my mother's sister, that she had learned how to embroider when she was out in Portugal. She was born in Graciosa at the time. And she come out this way, we were young, I'd say about 8, 9, 10 years old. She taught us all, and she taught me how to embroider anyways. It was pillowcases and dish towels and, little doilies, right? And so,
Now you're being pretty serious here, but I know you were a little shit when you were a little kid. I've heard these stories. Okay. Now, can you think of any funny little stories or any funny little incidences that happened?
Dirty
when you were
old
a
things
little
that you
kid?
did.
Down
My
Miss
father
Sullivan's
said you
way.
used
Oh,
to tease even the boys
well, I
playing
know
ball
when
and stuff.
I was in the first grade and I was going, Miss O'Sullivan was my first grade teacher. And she used to stand in front of my desk. She always wore up these high-heeled shoes with these pointed toe-outs and the back-outs. And I guess one day, I don't know, I just happened to turn around and talk to one of the kids, one of the students in back of me. And of course, she come over and she yanked my hair. No, I says, oh yeah. So I didn't say nothing, Of course, I was very upset over it. So I went home and told my mother about it. And anyways, which I didn't think it was no big thing, but to Miss O'Sullivan it was. So the next day I goes back into school, and of course I had been thinking this all night long what I was going to do. I was bound, determined to get back at her. So she's standing in front of my desk that morning, and she's talking to the class, and I just snuck underneath her desk, and I went over and I just tickled her toes. And I thought she was going to flip, Well, that was, she wrote a note home to my mother, stating what I had done. And I said, well, I told my mother I was going to get back at her for pulling my hair for such a ridiculous thing, because I just turned around and probably said 2 words to one of the kids in back of me, She was kind of a very strict teacher.
Yeah, they were strict.
They
back
were
then.
good days, they
Things
were,
like
yes,
that.
yes.
Ridiculous.
You couldn't say boo, So, and then in fact, I don't think I finished school that year. I didn't go back. I think I went for about a month, and that was either the first grade and my mother kept me home, and I repeated the first grade the following year. So, so I was like maybe 25 years old when I got out of old high school.
You get a late start.
And it all started with Miss Sullivan.
It all started with Miss O'Sullivan. I'll never forget her. She was quite a teacher. And, those were the good old days. No, they were, you know. So I had a few run-ins, but we did have fun. That's right, we did.
Were you ever in the processions? I'm getting prompted.
Yes, I was.
You know what I'm gonna have you do, Dolly? I'm gonna have you just sit up a little bit because you're kind of looking like you're slouching a little on the thing. I want you to look.
Well, this
I want you to
pillow
look
is
like you're.
very
Yeah, I know it. That
comfortable.
couch is awful. That's why I'm kind of
No, I
watching
mean,
that to
it's
make
good,
sure you look all right. Okay.
My hand
Why don't
propped
you
up
tell me
here.
about the processions? That's okay.
Well, we used to feast St. Anthony's and the Holy Ghost. They always had these processions this Sunday, and I used to be in there with Marie. Yeah, right. After we made our first communion, like say a couple of weeks before that, when they did have the processions, we were allowed to wear our first communion dresses, you know. And Elaine, I had made my first communion the same time Elaine did, right? And we both marched in the parade that time, that procession. Oh, procession, I'm sorry.
Parade you.
Parade, right, you know. Well, yes, there's a band and there's a parade, you know. So, yeah, the Holy
Now, did you
Ghost.
buy those? Did you buy your dresses, or did Phoebe make them?
No, these dresses were bought, I think my Aunt Annie was the one that had, yeah, they would send, she would send money to my mother, and she dressed us up for our first communion and our confirmation, and, you know, she was very, very good. Of course, she never had any children, you know, so we were her babies, her children, you know. This was my mother's sister, you know, very, very nice person. So, she did help out a lot. She really did.
Now, is there anything else you can think of right now? Any other little incidences that might have happened, or anything you might have done with VOVO, or
There's one thing we used to
Well,
always go to this Chinese restaurant when, I don't know if she wants to talk about it.
I can't recall.
I used
She always
to,
take
the
us to,
tea room was my thing.
and the,
Oh,
whenever, she
yeah.
would take like one.
She would take one
person.
person at a time. We almost all did that. She'd take one person at a time. I don't know if she ever took you, Nobby, but she took me one time.
oh, that's
Yeah,
a good story.
we did go to the Dutch tea
But
room
she'd
quite
take one
often.
kid at a time usually when she had a chance, like whoever was home, and she'd take them to a
She'd take
to a
us to the
restaurant or
Chinese
something for a little
downtown.
snack, you know.
Chinese Chinese, right.
Upstairs.
Yes, so that was on
Near the 5
Central,
and 10.
on Central Street, right? I think it was on Central
Mary
Street at the time, oh, Mary,
Mary
oh,
Mary.
was it on there? Oh, with 5 and 10, yeah.
It was upstairs.
Shot
Yeah,
memory.
yeah I remember being
Okay,
going
you
up
know what
the
I'm gonna
stairs.
have you do, Dolly? I'm gonna have you look at me, okay, and kind of put that into a little more of a sentence, because we have the camera just on you right now, okay? So why don't you start off and say, oh, you know, once in a while, my
That
mother
means
would
I
take
can leave.
one of us and bring us to a restaurant kind of out by ourselves. Whoops. You know what, let us unplug today. You're wired for stuff. So why don't we start back here, and
No.
as a matter of fact, I'm going to talk to Dr. Ethel too, because there are a few things like your grandmother and stuff like that that my mother had said that you wanted to talk about. So we'll get these two going and then we'll come back to you, okay? Why don't you start off with anything that you can remember about Vovo when she was a little girl and her parents and
Your mother's gonna
That
do
would be
mostly,
great,
yeah.
yeah.
Marie has a lot of that.
Okay,
Okay. Well, my mother was 4 years old when she came to this country, and went.
okay, wait.
Okay.
Okay, guys out there, we have to be kind of quiet, okay? Because we can hear you while we're doing this.
Yeah, right now,
We just started, that's okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, all right.
My mother was 4 years old when she came over to this country with her family, and started school at Charles Street School, I think it was, and learned to speak English because, of course, she knew no English. Her sisters were in their teens, late teens, and of course her mother and father could speak no English. And she got to be the spokesperson at her young age. If they ever had to go to the doctors or stores or shopping, she had to go along and speak English and interpret for them all the time, even from the time she was quite young. And, you know, she grew up with her oldest sister, Phoebe. She did the sewing for the family. And the other girls, they worked in the mills. There were like 3 of them. And after a while, they slowly, one by one, got married. And my mother tells me about when they used to go to the dances, they had them at would be at a Portuguese club or different halls in the area. And of course, they had to be chaperoned. They could never go by themselves or with another girlfriend. They had to have a member of the family. And lots of times she said it was her sister Deolinda, who was already married, a young married woman at the time. And they had a lot of fun there, but they had to be chaperoned. And of course, it was there that she met my father. And he kind of had an eye out for her. And of course, at first they didn't like it too well because he was from Madeira and they were from Graciosa. And even though they were all Portuguese, they still had this, well, you know, couldn't you find a nice fella from Graciosa? But after a while, she just thought he was pretty good. So they went out, and her father was very strict. They didn't even like them to take a walk or something.
Yeah,
Oh,
just,
like I
yeah,
hear.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
why don't you start with,
Is this,
My mouth is
father was
dry.
very strict.
is this gonna be just her, or should we sort
Yeah,
of,
if I could take
should
it.
should I get into?
You can get into it. We
Well,
have
that's
one
what I
shot, or
wasn't
we have a
sure
single
of,
shot?
like,
Okay.
but that's
Okay, you know what,
Yeah, you were doing very well,
we have
but
a one shot
I
on
thought,
her right now, okay?
that's okay, yeah.
If there's something particular that you wanna talk
Right,
about,
right.
kind of just
I didn't know how you-
signal me and let
oh,
me know,
fine.
we'll pull out
No, that's
and
good
get
so
a
far.
shot of you.
Oh, I
Oh,
know.
yeah.
Would you,
And
do you
I
wanna
was so
drink, Elaine, too? Are you
I,
thirsty?
a little bit,
Sit-
yeah.
sitting on
Why
these
don't you
lights.
get Elaine a drink,
Well, we've
too?
been waiting.
Why don't you start
Yes.
with, her parents were very strict.
Yes, her parents were very strict, especially her father, my grandfather. It was like if she wanted to take a walk just to even to meet my father and say hello to him, she had to make all kinds of excuses that she was going to go with her girlfriend, you know, to the drugstore or something, and that's where she would, you know, along the way plan and meet my father just to talk and say a few words, because it was just they just kept such tight reins on them, of course, and I suppose being in a new country and even afraid of meeting people that they didn't know and all that. They had a lot of fun. She said she always had a lot of fun and enjoyed herself a lot when she was a kid, and especially the one thing they had to look forward to would be the dances and the little feasts from the church, Holy Ghost Sundays and getting all dressed up. Even in those days, they were dressed up very fancy in their very best, and were in the processions there. A lot of different customs. She says they, like Sundays was especially a day where friends would come and visit each other, family and friends. Their friends would come over, and they did a lot of cooking. They always had a lot of food and a lot of cooking, and they looked forward to seeing people. Of course, there was nothing like television. They probably didn't even have a radio then, or a telephone. And which brings me to this, that when they decided to get married, they were engaged and they decided to get married, and I asked my mother, well, how were your invitations? Because you did have, because she said they had quite a few people at their wedding, and she says, well, we didn't send invitations, and they did it in a manner like they did it in their islands in Graciosa, where they came from. And it was like this. It took probably a few weeks, maybe a month or so before the wedding. This would be in the evening after supper. My mother and my father and my grandfather would go from house to house, whoever the families they wanted to the wedding, and would give them a personal invitation. He would introduce, this is my daughter's intended, and we are going to be married. They are going to be married at such and such a place and such a date, and we would like you to come. And then they would go to the next family that they wanted to come to their wedding. And this was done like every night after supper until they had all the families and people that they wanted to come to their wedding come to their wedding. There was no like sending invitations. This is how they did it back there, and they also, and this is how it was done when they came over here. So that's how they knew to show up at their wedding. They had a personal invitation.
Now, why don't we pull out to, why don't we go to Elaine?
About the lunches, you don't want, do you
You
want to
can
go
say
back
that.
and forth?
Yeah, we're gonna, we'll focus on you for a minute. Now, why don't you tell me, did you have something in particular? Let me look down at your things here.
Like, my
How about,
memory's mostly.
Yeah, your memory is mostly like you singing with VOVO, and she taught you how to sing those songs
Well,
and things like that.
Not quite like that, but it was mostly,
Well, why don't you tell
okay,
me?
my
what it was like?
memories, yeah, right. Yeah, I was trying to
Elaine.
think. My memories were mostly of music, Portuguese music. I have a lot of fond memories, and I do recall a lot of different customs and things, but I guess I have a special place in my heart for music, and especially Portuguese music. Somehow, I just don't know where it came from, but it was there, and I remember, I don't think there was a day that I can recall that I was, home during the day or come home from school or in the evening that my mother didn't sing in English and Portuguese. And somehow I just enjoyed the Portuguese. I enjoyed the old 1920s music that she used to sing, but the Portuguese, I had a desire somehow to, I just wanted to learn. I didn't speak very well in Portuguese, but the music really, I think that encouraged me to learn to speak, and I did. Also, I remember she had a few favorites, and they were old. They were really old music and really old songs. And I learned, some verses and such, but I thought to myself, I want to, I want to learn something new and get interested in that. So I did eventually even buy some music. This was later, of course, when I had a little part-time job, and I was able to buy some Portuguese records and listen to them. And we had friends who had records. But prior to that, we would visit my grandmother a lot and stay over and such. And my aunt and uncle, my Aunt Phoebe and Uncle John, had a Victrola, and they had lots of Portuguese records. And they also had American music, but again, I was fascinated with the Portuguese, so we would spend a good deal of time, my sisters and I, and we'd wind up that RCA and Victrola and listen to some oldies, old American music, and oldies 1920s, flapper age music, but they had a good amount of a good selection and a good of Portuguese recordings, and I think some of them were imported. I'm not sure where they got them, possibly in Cambridge. They used to visit and drive into Cambridge, sometimes to visit friends in Peabody, but they're the old 78s.
How did you start
And
singing?
I just
with
listened,
musicians?
and well, I did
Yeah,
later,
tell me-
but this
tell me
was
about, well,
right.
tell me about when you sang. What?
Oh,
what,
okay.
Tell me what they
But that
called
led
the
to it,
songs.
right.
And
Okay.
when you sang that, who you sang with. Why don't you tell
Well,
me
let me start with okay.
that? We'll start where you're comfortable starting.
Yeah, let me think now. Well, from I think this was a big influence. Like I say, listening to these old 78s, and I was always fascinated by it. So I eventually did buy some of my own records and listened to the Portuguese Hour. They had a Portuguese program on. And I would also, some friends had recordings, and I would listen to those. And I had a friend or two, you know, that would help me with words, and my mother did write them out. And from there, I just, I decided that that was going to be a hobby, but then somehow Mr. Batista and Mr. Ferreira, who were associated with the Portuguese Hour, were looking for live musicians and singers and such, and Jimmy Oliveira, of course, was well known in the community, and his brothers, and at that time, though, their two brothers were together, and they would play. But then Happy Valerio was one of the fellows that they played with at different clubs. So they knew a lot of Portuguese music, and what happened, I think, I'm not exactly sure. I don't recall exactly how they approached me, but I was in choir at the time, and my sister Marie and I were in choir, St. Anthony's Choir, and maybe through word of mouth, somebody might have, said something to them anyway. They, somehow, someone approached me, and I think it was Mr. Ferreira, and it might have been even through Frank Santos, because in church we sang Portuguese hymns, and I think I used to hint around that I loved the music well. However, we would, planned rehearsals. They knew nothing of how I sang or what I did, but I just told them I could do it, and I had these words and to certain songs and written up, and I had listened to, and I memorized the tunes as best as I could, and Jim Oliveira wrote down all the chords. I used to hum them or sing them out in whatever key I sang in, and he put it all down on music sheets. It was handwritten, hand done. Some of it he did, his from memory. Some they did from memory, but a lot was Jim Oliveira did this. He wrote it down, and he was a wonderful musician. And we sang live. It was Eddie Santos, and sometimes my cousin George and myself. I just had a lot of guts, I guess. And there was something I really, I just had my heart in it. I mean, where it came from, I don't know. Must be just genetics somewhere. I love the music. I really enjoyed it. It's very sentimental.
What was your favorite song?
Well,
Do you remember? Do you
let me
remember
start.
any of the Portuguese songs? Could you sing a Portuguese song?
How do you want me to? Do you want me to start like? Because your voice is not going to be on this, right? It's
No,
not.
my
So,
voice is
okay.
not
All right.
It's the one on those
We had-
tapes. Just get the
Yeah.
tapes.
Yeah, I have the tapes, but I was just, she sang a little piece.
I get very interested in, somehow it must have been my age, it was rather, there were love songs, the Fathers, and they were songs of unrequited love, and I'm sure, rather, when you're a teenager, I understood the types of songs, and a little dramatic, and they were sad, they were love songs, but they were sad songs, and but they somehow the music was just so beautiful. I didn't care if they were sad or not, but they were emotional, and I like that. I like the emotion. And then I also had a few, I sang very happy songs. One was Casa Portuguesa, which is at that time was a new song. That was in the 50s. Another was Vida do Mundego. Those were, every year, I guess in Portugal, they had contests for music from different areas, different provinces. And Father John Silver, he was a pastor then, and he had a lot of recordings. And he would tell me stories, since I was interested in music, he helped me in that respect, and he would always have the latest recordings of the contest when there was a songwriter and from the area, provinces, and that was one of them. One year, it was the early 50s, so I used to sing that, and I love that. And it's very continental though, but one song that I never sang, and I just loved, because my mother sang it. And that's probably the first song I remember my mother singing, and it was Ai Ruxinol. It was a very old song about a bird, and I always wanted to do that. And
John played that. and sang.
Uncle
That was
John
John's song.
used to play this on his, when he'd get together, even alone. And Ma used to do that.
Yeah.
She used to sing that around the house a lot. She sort of more or less taught us how,
Yeah.
I think she taught us
The words, yeah.
the words.
And he did too. Yeah, he used to play
And
that
he
all
did,
the time.
right.
Okay,
Oh,
we're gonna
did
take
she
a break
take
here,
one?
one
Do you know
second,
the
okay?
words to that?
Some of it.
Can you
yeah.
go up on the box on my
One right
bed?
here.
Oh, you got another one there? Okay.
Do you want me to hum that? I do, I love that.
If you could-